Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today, we'll talk about the astrology of June 2022. First off, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons who have made all of these videos possible. If you would like to join my Patreon and get early and, in some cases, exclusive access to astrology and magic videos, you can go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin. At the highest tier, you can also subscribe to my monthly ebook, Magical Elections, which gives you the best times and instructions for making planetary talismans. First, let's talk about the themes we will see in June. June is a month with a lot fewer astrological events when we digest the events of April and May. So this is kind of a quieter month, relatively speaking. However, note that the lunar eclipse of May 15th is still effective through September. So looking at the transits to the late fixed signs, which is where the eclipse was, could be instructive and I think is going to be important in the months to come. Now, in June, the focus has definitively shifted to Aries, and though Aries is not being particularly challenged yet this month by tough aspects to planets in Aries, the spotlight is definitely on projects of conquest and aggression this month, rather than the feel-good, all-is-well vibe of Pisces. It turns out that perhaps all is not well, as Pisces would have us believe, and everyone is not happy, and in Aries, anybody's dissatisfaction with the status quo will be shared in no uncertain terms, and therefore a pressure for change will result. Now, let's recap May. May was a very active month astrologically, since it contained that 25-degree Scorpio eclipse. Mercury stationed retrograde in Gemini, and the month ended with a powerful Mars-Jupiter conjunction at 3 degrees Aries. Now, Venus, Jupiter, and Mars all moved into Aries in May. Jupiter will have a last look into Pisces later in 2022, but certainly Aries is now suddenly energized in much the same way that Pisces had been earlier. This can make for a bit of a whiplash effect. We thought the rules had been set in April and May, and now it turns out there's a whole new set of players involved. The spotlight is moving very rapidly now from one favored group to the next, and so again, there can be a bit of a disorienting whiplash effect. Now, week 1 of June starts off with June 3rd's Mercury going direct at 26 degrees Taurus. Mercury will spend another 10 days in Taurus before moving on to his domicile Gemini. And this direct station reflects a momentous change of direction. So around June 3rd, look for events representing small but significant shifts in long-standing trends that previously seemed to be getting worse. Mercury left Gemini for Taurus. That was a loss in dignity for Mercury. So this change of direction in late Taurus is an omen for mercurial projects that will gain significant speed and improvement in quality as Mercury goes direct and later gains in dignity. Now, the projects we're talking about here could be varied, but I will note that Mercury is going direct right on Algol, the very malefic fixed star, which is connected to things like violence and atrocities. And so sometimes we will get news relating to war where there's kind of a turning of the tide. I don't think this is the full turning of the tide. This is kind of the precursor to it actually happening. It's an early omen, if you will. But if we look at signs and signals carefully at this time, you will see a sense of the tide shifting around June 3rd. Now, the very next day, June 4th, Saturn will go retrograde at 25 degrees Aquarius. Remember that for Saturn, his stationary period is 5 days. So he actually has been stationing since May 31st. And so you can think of that station as really being 5 days long. And it's only on June 1st that he actually changes direction to go retrograde. Limitations and seemingly straight paths, the kinds of things that Saturn favors, will disappear for the 4 months that Saturn is retrograde. This can be good or bad, obviously, depending on the context, but is reflective of a longer process starting that now will involve a reevaluation of matters. In the second week of June, there isn't a whole lot of activity. The only thing worth noting is on June 11th, Venus will conjoin Uranus at 16 Taurus. I don't consider this a major aspect just because of Venus's involvement, but in a collective context, since Uranus is involved, there could be a dramatic event concerning women or the arts, anything to do with Venusian issues. We could get another installment in the U.S. Supreme Court drama, with the court threatening to reverse women's federal right to obtain a legal abortion in the United States. So this aspect could indicate the decision itself perhaps coming out, or protests or other major events concerning it right around this time. The third full week of June starts out astrologically with June 13th, Mercury entering Gemini. So he is direct now and therefore very strong. So this will bring us a few good talismanic opportunities for Mercury. They are captured in my monthly magical elections document, by the way. It's a nice boost in dignity for Mercury, who is very verbal right now in Gemini and very interested in language and negotiation. Planets moving into Gemini this month could give us a preview of issues that are expected to get a lot of notice while Mars transits Gemini for about 800 years later this year. The next day, June 14th, we'll get a full moon at 23 Sag. This full moon is ruled by Jupiter in Aries, and Jupiter is now separated from Mars by about 10 degrees, so I don't think Mars is extremely involved here. Generally, Jupiter as a ruler of a lunation is favorable, and he is sextile Mercury in Gemini in this chart. So there is a sense of optimistic thought here and can-do communications, especially around things like the economy, around things like money, and business, because Jupiter and Mercury together have a very strong money and capital influence. Negotiations could be very fruitful now, and the pace of thought and speech is pretty quick, since Jupiter is an immovable or cardinal fire sign. No major aspects by the visible planets to the full moon axis make this a relatively uncomplicated, if fast-paced, fortnight. June 16th, Venus will conjoin the North Node at 22 Taurus, another more minor aspect, but one of Venus's interesting aspects this month. She makes quite a few. We could see something to do with deception. That is one of the significations of the North Node on the part of women. Perhaps a woman is being seen as a deceiver or is being deceived herself. Sometimes it can also indicate an elevation or coming into prominence for a Venusian figure. That's the other signification for the North Node. Now, June 18th, Venus will square Saturn at 25 at Taurus and Aquarius, respectively. This is not a hugely, usually influential aspect in terms of mundane events, but I would see this as Venus testing the boundaries of a retrograde Saturn. Obviously, planets retrograde tend to pack a lot less punch than when they're direct. And so it's interesting to see other planets squaring them or opposing them or conjoining them, because there's always this tendency for the retrograde planet to be at a little bit less than full strength. So Venus may not succeed in her boundaries, in the boundaries that she is testing, as Saturn is still a superior planet in his own sign and in a superior position relative to Venus, but that won't always be the case. Venus is going to try to make some headway, but Saturn will still stand very strong. The full fourth week of June starts with June 20th, Mercury perfecting the sextile to Jupiter at 6 Gemini and 6 Aries that we saw pending in the earlier full moon. This is not a huge aspect, it's a sextile. It gives Jupiter an assist though. It's certainly going to be very verbal, very fast moving. It's a very creative combination that is excellent for moving deals of any kind forward, especially deals concerning money. June 21st, we have our Cancer ingress in 2022, and this is the moment that the Sun enters the second cardinal sign in the annual cycle, which is Cancer. And this moment marks the official start of summer in the northern hemisphere and winter in the southern hemisphere. This is an interesting chart, and I think it deserves its own video. What's fascinating about the Cancer ingress is that we have a remarkable 5 out of 7 visible planets in their own signs. The remaining 2 are the Moon and the Sun, who are in a square with mutual reception, so they're strengthening each other. The Moon's next aspect is a conjunction with Jupiter, followed by a sextile to Mercury. So I view this as a remarkably positive and action-oriented chart. Obviously, depending on the location for which you set it, different planets will be emphasized and de-emphasized. But overall, it could be helpful to individuals and parties that are currently in power. Note that the Moon-Jupiter conjunction is on the Aries ingress Sun, of course, at 0 degrees Aries. This chart tends to buttress and support existing power structures rather than having a revolutionary tendency where it destroys them or dissembles them in some way. June 22nd, Venus will enter Gemini, and of course she loses dignity by making that move as she's departing from her home in Taurus. But the plus side is that Venus becomes very lively and very communicative about now. There is certainly a strong tendency to call out any issues that may be seen, if there are especially disharmonious aspects to Venus, which there won't be too many, but we are going to see, of course, some challenges. The 5th week of June, with June 27th, we have a Mars sextile Saturn at 24 Aries and Aquarius. Now, the sextile is a minor aspect, but I thought it was worth mentioning here because it's the first major aspect after the Mars-Saturn conjunction in early April. This conjunction, just to jog your memory, marked the worldwide publication of the Russian army's atrocities in Ukraine. And it's very appropriate that it was the Mars-Saturn conjunction in a humane sign, because these are very much things that go against humanity, against what we think human beings should do to each other. So I expect that around June 27th, we will see another development in that story, perhaps the opportunity for payback or some kind of closure. It's difficult to say, but it's going to be another chapter that was essentially begun by those events in Ukraine in early April. June 28th, Venus will sextile Jupiter at 7 Gemini and Aries, respectively. This is generally favorable, though of course minor, as a sextile is. It could be a good day to try your luck at whatever you may choose. Certainly, Jupiter's more aggressive and bold projects are being supported right now and getting kind of a happy face put on them, right? Jupiter may or may not always act in the best way, but with Venus, it gets a more palatable face, if you will. The same day, June 28th, is a new moon at 7 degrees Cancer. Now, the moon herself is the ruler of this new moon, and she is undergoing an intense purification due to her conjunction with the sun. So this is really the new cycle of all new cycles, and it carries a certain optimism and expansiveness to it this year, since the new moon exactly squares Jupiter in Aries. Certainly the next couple of weeks will have people raring to go and get started on whatever project. There's a lot of pent-up energy and enthusiasm that's going to unfold in the coming weeks after this new moon. So to summarize, June is going to be relatively less eventful than April and May were, but we have plenty to digest. And in many ways, June is going to act as a preparatory month for the more eventful month of later this summer and, of course, later this year as well. Thanks for watching. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel.